Hey guys, it's PSL here, and I'm here for the 9th and in fact the second to last part in the What Matters Most series, in which we are finding out which component of a car matters most to its overall speed by fitting them individually to a Honda NSX on Gran Turismo 4 and then taking that modified car out for a one-lap dash around Laguna Seca. Now this time I'm going over the suspension on the NSX and how having a sophisticated and effectively tuned suspension can affect a car's one-lap pace. Now there are 3 different suspensions you can buy in the game. You've got the sport suspension, then there's the semi-racing suspension, and then finally you've got the creme de la creme of suspensions, the fully customizable suspension. And now the fully customizable suspension is the one we're using because it allows you to modify lots of different aspects of the car in terms of its handling and how the tyres make contact with the road. And now because of how sophisticated the suspension is, there are tons of benefits to this fully customizable suspension, assuming you can tune it correctly, which I will try and get into now. So now the first part of the suspension that you can tune is the spring rate of the car. And now, just before I get onto this, I just want to note that these settings I'm offering for the suspension may not be the perfect settings, because I'm not like an expert in setting up suspensions or setting up cars in general for that matter, but these are the best ones that I've found from my knowledge of suspensions. These are the best settings that I've found, and if you do have better settings then be sure to let me know in the comments below. Anyway, back onto the spring rate settings. So for both the front and rear I upped the spring rate setting from 13 on the front and 10 on the rear to 17 on both the front and rear, out of a maximum possible 18. This increased spring rate works in tandem with a lowered ride height and allows all 4 tyres to be continually pressed into the road, and so offering more grip more of the time than previously, which obviously will help a car's lap time. And now speaking of the ride height, that has been lowered from 120mm on the front and rear of the car to the lowest setting of 89mm on both the front and rear of the car. Now this lowered ride height helps to improve aerodynamics of the car as it runs lower to the ground, and should improve straight line speed as the car doesn't cut through the air as much, and so due to it cutting through the air more easily, we'll be able to travel more easily and so gain speed more easily, and hence why a lowered ride height actually enhances your straight line speed. But a lowered ride height also helps the effect of increasing the spring rate, as mentioned earlier. Now the dampers have also been uprated from 8 on both the front and rear on the bounce and rebound to 10 on the front and rear bounce and rebound. Now this upsetting also helps to increase the tyre's contact with the road, and so providing more grip more of the time. However, it does warn that too high of a setting may cause the car to bounce as you drive along, especially on sections with sheer altitude changes, which Laguna Seca does have a lot of. But with these settings on the maximum, I never seem to feel the car bouncing up and down and obviously losing speed because of it. And obviously having it on a higher setting offers a lot of benefits, and with that being the only downside, and I didn't actually feel that downside being there, it made sense to keep it on the high settings with there being all the benefits and seemingly none of the disadvantages from it. Next we have the camber angle, and that was increased from 2 on the front and 1 on the back to 3.5 on the front and 3 on the back. Now the camber angle changes the angle of the tyres, and a small angle like 3 or 4 can make your use of the tyres more effective, albeit resulting in a higher tyre wear, but that isn't relevant for this test. Also, while the setting has been upgraded, it is still much less than it could be, with the maximum being 12 on the front and 10 on the back. But that is because too high of a setting can make the car hard to turn, and obviously that would negatively impact on the NSX's lap time, and that's why we don't want it on a really high setting, as a really hard to turn car is obviously going to result in a poor lap time. And that's why we've kept the camber angle on this relatively low setting, enough so it enhances the tyre's contact with the road, but not too much that makes the car difficult to turn. Now the final aspect of the suspension that I changed was the rear toe angle from 0 to -1, which is a slight toe out angle. Now this slight toe out angle will make the rear of the car easier to turn without it being on too high of a setting where it leads to a tendency to oversteer the car. And that's why I changed the toe angle by such a small amount, because obviously you don't want the rear of the car to turn so much that leads to continuous oversteer, but at the same time you want it turned up somewhat so that the car just feels happier turning into the corners and it's just more nimble and more agile, which obviously is going to help a car's lap time. And then you got the front toe angle and the front and rear stabilizer settings, which were left unchanged from the standard settings as I didn't feel any reason to change them. Now, as a reminder, once again, this series has a standard time in a standard NSX, with that lap time being a 1 minute 39.7 seconds, and that's obviously with the standard NSX including its standard suspension. And now, so with all of these changes made to the car suspension, and so handling an even straight line speed, we should expect a fairly significant change in how the car feels, and hopefully that can translate into a quicker lap time. Well, the first thing I could say is that with this change in the car suspension, the car definitely felt much nicer to drive, and I think that's because I set the car up to be more racy than the standard car, due to obviously its more racy suspension setup than the standard car, which would have had a suspension more suitable to everyday road going environment as well. But obviously with this more racy suspension, tuned in such a way that provided more grip more of the time, and also helped the straight line speed somewhat thanks to a lowered ride height, the car just felt a lot quicker, and also with the increased camber angle and increased spring rate, it just felt grippier, and generally the car just felt a lot nicer to drive and a lot quicker. But as we all know, feeling doesn't necessarily mean a quicker lap time, but in this instance, the car feeling much more nimbler, a bit happier in a straight line, and just generally just happier to be on a racetrack, obviously with its suspension tuned to go on a racetrack rather than on the road with the standard suspension. The car did actually set a quicker lap time around Laguna Seca, because its racing suspension modified to suit the car and the track in a racing environment set a lap time around Laguna Seca of a 1 minute 38.6 seconds, which is 1.1 seconds a lap faster than the standard car with its standard and obviously more road friendly suspension. So this was indeed a fairly big improvement from the suspension, which is surprising as, factually speaking, it made no improvement to any statistic of the car. Unlike power, which increases obviously its horsepower stat, the suspension doesn't actually factually change anything, but just through enhancing and slightly modifying the suspension, it paid dividends with a substantial improvement in lap time per lap. And that's obviously thanks to a racy suspension, which is harder and meant for a track, rather than a more road friendly suspension, which is going to be softer and more able to deal with things like potholes, which obviously you don't get on a racetrack. And so changing it from that road stance to that racing track stance improved the lap time to no end. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the 9th part of the What Matters Most series, in which we saw the effectiveness of how a more advanced and highly tuned suspension and its improvement to the car's 1 lap pace. And in fact the suspension was the last part we had to test out for this series, and so the next part in this series is in fact the final one. So, in the final part we will see the slowest possible NSX, the standard NSX and the quickest possible NSX against a racing modified NSX, and we'll see how big of a difference overall we can make to the NSX, and if we can get a road going NSX to beat a racing car NSX used in real life Japanese Super GT races, using everything that we have learnt from this series so far. So it is sure to be a very interesting finale to see if we can get road cars finally faster than racing cars. And so I hope you guys stick around to watch the next part, because it's going to be very interesting, and if you do, I'll see you guys then.